things on, and looks like we're good. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope everyone has had a good. Wow, it feels so weird. It's Monday. I wanted to say it was Thursday for some reason. It feels like a Thursday. Anyway, hope everybody's doing well. Hope everyone's had a good day, good evening. It's been a tough day on this end. But partially we're here for weather discussion. Do have a tornado warning ongoing. Trying to see how many people end up coming in while we're at it. We did get a tornado earlier in Grand Island, actually, which is pretty interesting. Wasn't really planning to do much in the way of live coverage tonight. A lot of these storms are going to really start to pick up as we get later into the evening here, so. And then a pretty weird schedule. I'm going to have to be up super early from the looks of it. Just trying to figure out what the heck's going on with the vehicle situation here. Anyone that doesn't know, car broke down yesterday. Got fixed today, or so we thought. And then now it's broken down once again. So, kind of in a little bit of a rough patch here, trying to figure out what to do next. So, that's my situation at the moment. So, yeah, that's partially why I'm not covering this setup. And then on top of that, it's just, even then, just in regards to my work schedule, this is going to be problematic eventually. I only will have maybe a couple hours to cover this anyway. We'll see how this will all pan out in the end. Oh, wow. And with me tuning in for the first time this evening, of course, a lot of things that I didn't know about, like rest in peace to Brandon's windshield. Oh my goodness. My goodness, that is gone. Yikes. That's gonna leave a mark. Looks like Connor's windshield is still intact. Yeah, Brandon's windshield is kaput. My goodness. Again, hoping everyone's doing well. We're going to get into the discussion in just a second. I just kind of wanted to take a look at things. Tornado watch is going to be on for another 3 hours, it looks like. It's probably going to be the only little bit that I cover of this, truthfully. I figured I'd at least kind of get a peek at things. Had 3-inch hail to go along with it, so pretty busy evening, and can expect more activity as we get later into the evening. I am kind of curious as to what tomorrow is going to look like in regards to streaming. I do want to stream it, but with the vehicle situation as it is, things could get a bit complicated. But in any case, let's go ahead and actually take a look at things real quick. Okay. So we're going to go to our model data here. I'll keep an eye on the radar. I'll have it to a secondary screen here on the right, but we're going to show what's going on with our severe weather setup over the next couple days, because that's been talk of the town anyway. It's been upgraded to a moderate risk, as we mentioned earlier, and potential for further upgrades. The biggest thing that I've made note of is, for one, the area. Very familiar with derechos, unfortunately. Des Moines, Iowa, we have the potential for yet another one again. This also comes with a 10% hatched risk for tornadoes, so we could see a couple of strong ones. But I really think the damaging wind threat is what's going to take the cake here. Hail threat's pretty high over towards Omaha and Lincoln, Nebraska. Des Moines in there as well, so we could have some wind-driven hail there, which is extremely dangerous. You do not want to get caught in that. But as we basically look at the area that we're looking at showers and storms firing right now, this is where we can expect the most severe weather tomorrow. Areas just a little bit further off to the east here, maybe even off to the northeast a bit. So things we'll go ahead and take a look at here. And this model is just about finished coming in, so this is a freshie for me. So basically this is almost like a reaction, so we're going to be kind of seeing all of this at the same time here. So looking at 500, this is our trough that's going to be responsible for our storms tomorrow. We do have a corresponding jet streak to the south here that's going to come into play. This is a lot like the setup that we saw yesterday, really. So not really surprised to see a very similar outcome as to what we had yesterday. We also had a moderate risk with that setup, and that very much verified. And we had a nice little mix of everything. We had very large hail, we had tornadoes, we had significant damaging winds. It was a pretty wild night. And it looks like the same thing is pretty much in the cards here. You can see evidence of that first line of storms popping off here. It's going to be happening right around lunchtime, maybe just a little bit before. As we continue, that second round is going to be the one that I'm increasingly interested in. Like I said, we do get this increased area of energy within the jet stream here at 500 millibars. And if we were to go up any higher, which we actually will in this case, we'll go to College of DuPage here. Or actually not College. We'll go to College of DuPage, look at the wrap. And we'll look at the 250. Try to make sure we have the right forecast hour here to work with. Okay, model run. Had that wrong. There we go. Go to 250, wind speed. If we go over the same area, if we move this forward, we do end up getting that jet streak that I was talking about earlier coming into play. And what I was mentioning before was that jet streak is this little area right here where we're right at about 100 knots plus here. This little area in the red that we get to pop up here. Wrap's kind of showing a little bit further to the south than I would anticipate. But in consideration with what I was seeing with divergence here, this area might be a bit variable. So have to keep an eye on this and see how that plays out here. But if I were to look at the 28-hour run on, let's say, GFS, even though this is a little bit of a more dated run, okay, there's actually pretty good agreement here. Only problem is this run's going to be outdated in about 2.5 hours. So we're kind of at the middle of a model cusp here. We probably won't get a great idea as to how things progress until morning. But again, there's that jet streak right here towards Kansas. I think areas just to the north and east of this are going to be the point of interest. We do have good speed shear. I think directional shear isn't going to be an issue either. If I looked at the low-level jet for the setup tomorrow, you can see that south to north flow right there, right off towards eastern Iowa. The main thing is the convective mode. Anything that forms on that line is going to have increased chance of outflow, a lot like how Sunday's setup did. However, if we get any sort of discrete cells, just like we did over towards Oklahoma, we do have the opportunity for tornadoes and, of course, some strong winds. That's the one thing that we didn't get as much of a highlight of in the Sunday setup is the fact that we were pretty much hot on the damaging wind threat, but the tornado threat was pretty low, or it was anticipated to be pretty low, but it actually ended up, I would almost even say, somewhat overperforming, considering it was a 5%. There's actually a couple of pretty strong looking tornadoes based on what I saw on the Doppler radar. If we look at the 700 millibar region looking for short waves, of course, like I said before, early morning to lunchtime initiation seems likely, but the main event really starting to pick up towards early to mid-afternoon. And here's that point. And here's that point right here. There's our short wave. And it's going to be our main event here. This is where I think this is where the winds will be the strongest with this group cluster of storms of fire set about mid to late afternoon into early evening. And we'll watch that move off to the east here. And look at the amount of wind energy at this level. That's really impressive at this point. We're at about maybe 70 to 80 knots, and at the mid levels, that's pretty daggone fast. 80 knots in general is pretty fast. But you're getting towards what would be anticipated as even the maximum at this level of altitude here. So it's pretty dangerous. So they may actually expand that moderate risk a little further off to the east if this forecast holds. So, like I said, as far as the kinematics are set up, definitely kind of leans into that damaging wind threat. Seeing a lot of evidence that kind of points towards it. We already know what the dew points are going to be like. We already know it's going to be very much a saturated mess over towards this region. A super impressive moisture return, of course. And in response to that, to go along with it, we have pretty impressive precipitable water to go along with it. So if we were to go ahead and move forward here, the storms that form up in the morning and into the early afternoon are going to have increased potential for flooding here. And then the afternoon storms, the main event, thankfully there's not going to be quite as much moisture, but still the threat for flooding will remain throughout the entire day. If we were actually to go ahead and take a look at the WPC here, looking at excessive rainfall for tomorrow, do have a pretty broad slight risk area. I do think areas further to the north will have an increased chance of flooding. We'll have to see if this pushes south. It would not surprise me if it would, but we'll have to keep an eye on that and see how that progresses as well. But anyway, this precipitable water gives us a pretty good idea of that. I don't expect as much activity further to the south here, so perhaps this will spare these areas like Kansas City, which I would be more concerned with the flood threat due to last night's storms. So keep things moving here. And then, of course, we'll watch that head off to the east here for the Wednesday setup. Mainly going to focus on tonight, though, or tomorrow. I should say not Wednesday as much. So, with that in mind, we'll get into the next parameter here. I do think for the most part, we're going to be looking at storms forming mostly along the frontal boundaries. Trying to figure out exactly where that would be in this case. It's a little bit messy looking at the map here. What I'm looking for here are pressure tongues here, where you can see these little isobars kind of pointing out a bit. I'm kind of leaning towards it being over towards maybe, I would say, southern Minnesota here. And then seeing the cold front push a little further to the south here. I'm going to check something really quickly. I'm going to move this over here so that way you can see everything that I'm doing here. Oh, I went a little too far. Okay. Yeah, I think I might have found it now. Yep. Okay. Okay, that's weird. Well, my brain isn't clearly not working right now. Here we go. It's been a while since I've done this. Right along here is where I would look for the cold front here, and I think the warm front would be our warm sector. I'm going to change the color to red here. I would think it's going to be somewhere around maybe here. I may have this completely wrong, but that's going to be my guess as to where our warm front is. Hoping that you're seeing what I'm doing here. There we go. I think you can see it now. Yep, you can. A little hard to see. That's the area in the blue right there. That's a cold front. Warm front is in the red. Like I said, it's where you see these little areas that kind of that are bulging forth here. I think I actually have the warm front pointing in the wrong way. It should be a little further up here. I made a mistake there. Oops. Making mistakes left and right, folks. Let you know that it's live. In any case, though, this is what our current situation is looking like here. Warm sector is pushed pretty far to the north here. We do have a pretty strong frontal boundary over here to the south. We'll kind of just go on from that point. So, big indicator to the storm mode that we're going to have as we go through the next little bit here. Definitely is going to be the temperature advection. It's kind of how we figured out just how potent the damaging wind threat was for yesterday. Going to see a pretty similar deal in regards to the setup as well for tomorrow. I mean, 700, it's pretty apparent that there's a couple points of interest in regards to maybe the tornado threat being a thing. May even have to watch areas like Minnesota and Wisconsin here too, where we could see some of that dryness in the mid-levels. You want that moisture at the lower levels. We're looking at mid-levels right now, so we're kind of focusing on those areas in the blue, kind of touching with those areas in the red here. But notice as we continue to go forward, we see that increase in blue as we go from 3-hour span to 3-hour span here. And I think that's where we start to see the potential for those downbursts really starting to ramp up here. Once we flip things about, we do end up seeing potential here for those downbursts increase, because look at this. Same time frame, yes, you see that moisture over here at 700 or 850, excuse me. Right here, you can also see that outflow already starting to take shape here and increasing in coverage as we get later into the evening. This is why I'm most concerned about that threat of damaging winds, and I'm pretty sure a lot of other meteorologists see it too. So with that in mind here, over towards eastern parts of Iowa is probably why we have that 45% area with the hatch rest to go along with it. Very similar signal to what we saw yesterday, and we saw how that verified. We continue to see that signal as we get later into the evening. This is over towards Lake Michigan, of course. So Chicago, have to watch you as well, even though the threat will start to diminish, thankfully, with the loss of daytime heating. Also, we noted the 30% threat for hail. A lot of that's going to have to do with our lapse rates here, especially further off towards the west, mainly towards Omaha and Lincoln. If we continue to drag our cursor forward here, this is early towards the day here. Look how steep our lapse rates end up getting. We get into the 8s, get into the 9s here. This is where our storms would start to fire. This might be a little bit behind them. And there we go. This is right around the time we would have the storms passing through that Omaha region. It does look like we eventually start to see a drop off once those storms roll through, but it's got the look of a really good hail setup here for sure. We don't have really strong wind shear, which you don't really need for hail, so that's not surprising. The downburst or downdraft cape is pretty impressive at this point. Wind shear, like I said before, the wind shear for the tornado threat is not very high. Lapse rates are steep towards the mid to upper levels, so just what you would be looking for there. And really not a whole lot in the way of instability, which is not necessarily a requirement for setups like this one. But in any case, though, definitely seeing a look for some relatively large hail. And if we continue to move a little bit further along here, you start to see those lapse rates kind of drop off. But notice where that dryness is. Again, like we mentioned, especially towards those mid-levels, back over towards Iowa. Starting to see a little bit of correlation here, aren't you? And here's where we start to get a little bit more dangerous into the torque sounding here. Thankfully, I'm not too sure of the initiation at this, of whether we get storm initiation at this point. There is a little bit of a cap that tries to set up over towards the region. If we get the front to go through this region here, and we somehow end up getting a discrete storm to fire, we'll be more concerned about this. But I do think this cap probably holds moderately well. It's not a weak cap, but it's not a strong cap. There are some other parameters here that kind of work against it, but if the cap somehow does break here, the parameters are set for maybe even a strong tornado here. There are some really impressive numbers to show maybe even a long-lived supercell, but that is only if the cap breaks. It's a very conditional but dangerous strong tornado threat with this. Like I said, the most telling parameter with that is this little loop right here in this hodiograph that we're looking at, where we start from the 0 kilometer region here, we go from 1, and the transition, the increase in speed goes from almost, I would say, 17 knots all the way up towards 50. So it's a pretty rapid change there. So that's what, 36 for shear at the 0 to 1. Definitely something that you would need in regards to tornado threat. Storm is rooted to the surface. This environment is somewhat rooted to the surface here, which is kind of concerning. But yeah, if it overcomes the cap here, we could have a pretty serious tornado threat with this as well. And this is towards the early part of the afternoon. So eyes open for all threats of severe weather, even though the main threat is almost certainly going to be damaging winds. You can still get tornadoes with some of those more prominent damaging wind ratio type setups. I've seen plenty of them, and I've covered a couple on the channel since we've started. This one could be another one of those. So, of course, as we know, lapse rates are going to drop off. So, eventually, after that point, the threat is going to diminish along with that. So, what we're going to do next is take a look at our mixed layer cape. We're going to see just exactly what the atmosphere is baking up here. We're going to have some pretty impressive mixed layer cape as we get into the day. We're going to get into the 3,000 joule per kilogram range here, of course. Not really too much of a surprise given the time of year. We're going to start to get into that time frame where we're dealing with more of those high shear or high cape, low shear events. Definitely kind of leans into that damaging wind threat as we go forward here. We do end up getting these areas a little further to the south with higher levels of cape. Don't expect these areas to be quite as active, but still plenty dangerous in their own right. This is over towards Oklahoma and Arkansas. We do have a decent level of shear here. Could be something that pops off here. The cap is not quite as strong as I thought it would be. This actually has some potential here. So like I said, even though the main point emphasis is going to be towards Iowa, some of these other states we're going to have to keep an eye on. Mississippi, of course, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas. Parameters are still set in place for these regions to also get severe weather to go along with them. Hail, damaging winds, tornadoes, all very much possible with that too. And even as we get into the overnight here, over towards these regions, we have pretty impressive amount of cape. And it doesn't go away. It's very persistent. This is going to help feed the setup for the following day. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move onward to I think we're going to actually go ahead and look at a different parameter here. I think we're going to go with storm relative felicity. So this is another way of looking at the wind energy that's going to be available for the day on Tuesday, and we do get some pretty impressive values over here. I do think this is mainly going to be associated with damaging winds in particular, but over towards northeastern Iowa looks pretty impressive. I do think a lot of wind energy is still going to be available towards this region. We can get a combination of this forming with some of the cape here is going to be the key question. We can get up to about maybe even over 1,000 meters squared per second squared. Like I said, you have to have this in conjunction with our instability, moisture, etc. here. And further north you go, it isn't quite as impressive. So, while this looks scary over towards this region, I would not read into this too heavily. I don't usually use this parameter, and this is partially why. We are not a fear-mongering page whatsoever. Yeah, again, where these numbers are highest is usually where people's eyes end up being drawn to. It isn't really as potent over here. Where these parameters are highest, we have pretty strong cape in a lot of these regions. So I wouldn't say to fully disregard it, but I wouldn't be quite as concerned with this at the moment. See how it pans out, of course. Yeah, where the values are highest, though, we're not too concerned. I'm hearing a lot of delay. Why am I getting so much delay? Okay, there we go. I think I got it fixed. Yeah, there we go. Sorry if you guys have been hearing that extra delay or not. Any of you that are watching. Okay, so I guess now go ahead and take a look at our hodiographs here along with our surface-based cape. Not going to see too much different from what we've already been seeing with our soundings. Like I said, I do think towards early afternoon, towards maybe northeastern Iowa looks interesting. It is a little bit messy towards the upper levels, but even so, the threat for a tornado definitely comes into play here. Downdraft Cape definitely is high. I'm definitely thinking that's going to be the mode that takes over. A lot of outflow is going to be going with these storms here, so I think the convective mode is going to be mostly limited to a linear mode versus supercells, but not impossible to get one to fire off early in the afternoon. So I'm looking at these areas to the south as we continue to go forward here. Some decent profiles here. This looks okay, but I'm not, like I said, I'm not reading into it too heavily. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at it. This actually doesn't look awful. Again, it's that same area we were talking about earlier. A little bit of an issue with the cap, but it's not an incredibly strong cap. One that we can overcome. Only problem is, again, mainly looking like an outflow dominant environment once again. So kind of favors damaging winds here more so than anything else. If this can be discreet and the storm can root itself to the surface, could get a couple chances at maybe a spin up or two. And also, I think that chance kind of happens more so into the overnight, if anything. So again, that kind of leans into that damaging wind setup. If that low level jet were to kick up earlier in the day, I would be even more concerned about that tornado threat. So the last thing we'll do here before we get off, let's go ahead and take a look at what our simulated radar could look like. For the most part, like I said, activity, Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, then eventually heading into parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and maybe even parts of Indiana before we end up calling it a night here. So here's our storms for the night. Get really intense as we get late into the overnight, evening and into the overnight here. This is a big part of why we're not streaming it, unfortunately. Look at this by, this would be close to like maybe 2 a.m. Central Time. Look at how consolidated that line is. Look at how strong it is. That's really impressive. So we continue to go forward. We see this first line finally clear out through parts of Illinois, Iowa, and then eventually Wisconsin. Then we get some redevelopment to occur. That's going to be another key factor, is if we can get the atmosphere to recover, which I think it will. We should end up seeing a new area of redevelopment occur here. Then after that, that's when the game really starts to get going here. This would be close to about 6 to 8 o'clock Eastern time, so I would say about 5 to 7 Central. Look at these different segments within the line here. Areas of damaging winds possible. Do think embedded tornadoes could be in there as well, but I'm really thinking damaging winds are going to be the main headline here as we get into the evening. By the time we get towards midnight, we see that southern mode start to take off a bit more. But we're going to be finally getting towards the tail end of the event as we get into about maybe 11 o'clock Central. And then those will eventually start to weaken as well as we head into Wednesday morning. Then I do think a similar situation occurs for the Wednesday setup. Redevelopment occurs, and then we'll get a new line to fire for that day. But we'll have to just wait and see how things pan out. Do appreciate you guys being here. Hope everyone has a good night, and I'll hope to see you tomorrow. Until then, you guys take care again. Have a good night.